A good Erev Shabbos, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so very much for joining me once again for the learning of Teres Hashem Be'ezras Hashem Yisbarach. We begin with thanks to our host, TorahAnytime.com, for this fabulous platform all over the world in 180 countries, and to Chazak for helping us to publicize the share, and to all of you wonderful people, wherever you are, in whatever climate, whether there's piles of snow or beads of sweat or vaccines galore or lockdowns, wherever you are, it's wonderful to be sharing Torah with you, and we hope you should be gesund. Today, we have, the shir is sponsored by my good Talmud and neighbor Shimon Klein and the Jaffe family, the Klein and Jaffe family, Lila Nishmas Asher Anshel Ben Yehuda. His neshama should have an aliyah, should be Melitz Yosher, for his family, for all of us and all of Klal Yisrael. It's sponsored by a Talmud that I just became aware of, Richard Gallis. Lila Nishmas Mendel, son of Harry. He should have a wonderful Gan Eden and be a good to better, an interceder for the whole family. The shir is sponsored by my longtime Talmud Baruch Goldwasser and family. First of all, the refuah shalema for his wife, who's struggling somewhat. Baruch Hashem, she's not having problems breathing, but she needs a refuah shalema for COVID. Tova Sarah Bas Beila Rezel. And Le'ili Nishmas, his wife Zayda, Moshe ben Gershon HaKayin. Neshama should have an aliyah. And we learn by another Talmud of mine, a digital Talmud, Arthur Gober, Lili Nishmas, his mother's 28th Yortzeit, Henya Bas Yosef. The Neshama should have an aliyah. And speaking on behalf of Klal Yisrael, I want to mourn the loss of the three great tzaddikim that we just lost this week. Rav David Soloveitchik, the last son of the Brisker Rav, and Rav Shiner, and Rabbi Dr. Avram Tversky, probably the most prolific English writer in the last quarter of a century for sure, having written 70 svarim in English and benefited the entire world. This parsha, Yisro with the Aseret HaDibros, Har Sinai, what a very important parsha. One of the topics that I always made a big impression upon me is Yisro, who tells us, although he was the Kayenain and he studied all religions, he expresses to us what made an impression upon him that brought him to the realization that Hashem is the true God. And he says, Atu Yadati, now I know, Ki Gadol Hashem Mikol Ha'elokim, that Hashem is greater from all the other gods, Ki Badavar Asher Zodu, in that which they plotted to do against the Jews, Aleim, befell them. And this, of course, is the attribute of Midah Keneged Midah, measure for measure, that precludes any element of chance. Because not only were they given the Makis, but because they didn't allow the Jewish women to be toivel from the Tumas Dam, so that they shouldn't procreate, they were worried, Pen Yerba, there were too many Jews. So therefore the Nile became full of blood. They threw our babies, and the Nile was full of Jewish blood, and therefore the Nile turned into blood. And they screamed and yelled at us non-stop, and therefore the frogs croaked and drove them insane. They didn't allow us to bathe, and we became lice-infested, and therefore they were stricken with lice. So not only was it that the Rebbeinu Shalom wielded the Teva to whatever way he wanted, but also it was exactly Midah Keneged Midah, which precludes any element of chance. Ki badavar asher zodu. So the Griz says that Yisro knew what Paro plotted. Yisro knew that Paro plotted the final solution to drown the Jewish babies in the Yam. Right? He was in the inner circle in the final solution of Hava Nischak Maloi. Come, let's deal wisely with him. And says the Grizz, that's the meaning of Halu Kol Goyim. Praise all the nations, Ki Gavar Aleinu Chazdai, because they know more than us that Hashem's kindness prevailed, because we don't know all their plots. They know how their plots were foiled. Rashi tells us that the Lashon Zodu is from the Lashon of Nizid Adoshim, a stew. And he says that the meaning is the pot, K'deira Shebishlu, the pot that they wanted to cook us in, Babi Shelu, they were cooked in that pot. Now the literal meaning of this, of course, is that they drowned our babies in the Yam Suf, and therefore they were drowned. However, there's two problems with that, because if it would be pure Mida Keneged Mida, then they should have drowned, they drowned our babies in the Nilus, in the Nile, so they should have drowned in the Nile, not in the Yam Suf. And secondly, 9 million Egyptians came to chase us. It says, V'shalishim al kulai, 3-1, and we were 3 million strong, so therefore they were 9 million. And these 9 million, none of them ever drowned a Jewish baby. Because it says the last Jewish baby to be drowned was Moshe Rabbeinu. Because that's the reason why Yocheved put him in the water, so that it's stagnine paro, that the astrologers of Paro should see that the baby was put in. The baby that was supposed to be the Moshe Shel Yisrael was put in the water, so they stopped throwing babies into the water. Now Moshe Rabbeinu was 80 years old when he left Egypt. So if the last baby that drowned was 80 years ago, we can assume that none of the 9 million warriors were 80 years old. And they would have to be even older than that, because a baby didn't throw in babies, so they would have to be like 100 years old. None of these people drowned a baby in Egypt. So why did they drown? So Maharil Diskin gives one answer, and he says that they were the Gilgal. Only the Maharil Diskin could say that. That this second generation of Egyptians were the Gilgulim, were the reincarnation of the Egyptians that drowned the Jewish babies. That still doesn't answer that why they didn't drown in the Nilus, why they drowned in the Yamsuf. And therefore, he explains differently, and it's a insight into the troop shot in Rashi. It doesn't mean that they drowned because they drowned our babies. It's because they wanted to drown us. The 9 million Egyptians were pushing us to drown us, to drive us into the sea and drown us in the Red Sea. And that's why they drowned in the Red Sea. And that's the literal meaning of B'kdei Bishlu, the pot that they wanted to cook us, Babi Shelu. They were cooked in that pot. And that's why it was the Yamsuf and not the Nilus. However, I believe there's yet another insight into Biki Badover Asher Zodu Alem. The word Zodu from the Lashon of Hazid means to plot, to willful. And Kibadover Asher Zodu, it's interesting that in the Hova Nischak Malai, when Paro wanted to deal wisely, it's brought down that Paro was trying to decide how to kill us. Should he kill us by the sword? Should he kill us by hanging? And then Paro had an insight. He says, their God only punishes Mida Keneged Mida, measure for measure. So let's drown them, because he promised he won't bring a Mabel onto the world anymore. And that's the deeper meaning of Ki Badover Asher Zodu, that which they plotted. In other words, they plotted to Kaviyachal hamstring the Rebbeinu Shalom by using Mida Keneged Mida against him. He only punishes measure for measure, and he won't be able to punish us with water because he promised he won't bring a Mabel on the world. Of course, Paro made an error because Hashem said he won't destroy the whole world, but one nation he will destroy. But even more than that, Hashem says he won't bring water onto people. He didn't say he won't bring the people to existing water. And that's what he did. He brought them to existing water. And by the way, in that, again, it was pure Mida Keneged Mida. It was pure measure for measure, because that was Paro's diabolical way. He didn't have the Egyptians throw the babies. He told the Jewish parents to throw the babies into the water, right? So he said Jew should do to Jew. So here also it says, Hashem Yelochem lochem v'atem tacharishin. You won't raise a finger. The Egyptians will walk into the water themselves, which they did. They chased us into the water, and they went into their own watery grave. So that's Kibadover Asher Zodu. The Paro plotted to use Mida Keneged Mida against Hashem, to try to stop Hashem from punishing, and indeed, it was Mida the Keneged Mida, perfect Mida Keneged Mida, that punished Paro. Now it says, if you look more carefully into this pasuk, it says, Ki Gadol Hashem mikol ha'elokim, that Hashem is greater than all the gods, Ki Badover Asher Zodu Aleim. Now we all know that Hashem is Midas HaRachamim, and Elokim is Midas Hadin. Now Yisro observes that the drowning of the 9 million Egyptians is a manifestation of Hashem, of Midas HaRachamim. Now, how does 9 million Egyptians drowning in 4 hours in the last third of the night on Shvi Shel Pesach, how does that show a manifestation of Midas HaRachamim? Ki Gadol Hashem. So it's interesting that there's an Al-Shech HaKadosh. The Al-Shech HaKadosh quotes a pasuk, Ulecha Hashem HaChesed, to you Hashem is kindness, Ki ato tishalem leish kemaseyu. For you pay a person only according to their deeds. Says the Alshich, Mida Keneged Mida is a manifestation of Midas HaRachamim. Why? Because since Hashem only punishes measure for measure, it gives a person the ability to do tshuva. Because a person could see and say, why is this happening to me? Why am I getting canker sores? Am I not careful with what I am eating? Why am I getting earaches? Am I not careful in what I am listening to? Why am I getting headaches? Am I looking at the wrong things? In other words, says the Alshich, the Mida Keneged Mida aspect of Hashem's punishments is a Midas HaRachamim, because it gives a person a chance to diagnose why he's getting punished in order that he should be able to do tshuva. With this, by the way, there's an explanation to a very, very puzzling Gemara in Masechtas Brachos. The Gemara says in Masechtas Brachos, Im roya adam sheyisurin ban alav, if a person sees that they're having suffering, Rachmana litzlan, lo yaleinu, Yefash feish b'masav. One should search their deeds. It's a sign that they need to do tshuva and correct something. Pish peish v'loy matzah. If they do a good cheshbon and nefesh and they can't figure it out, they can't find something that they're doing wrong. So then the Gemara says yitla bebittul Torah. They should say it's because they're not learning Torah. So the obvious question is, Torah is a mitzvah. If they're not learning enough Torah, they should have found that problem. What do you mean, pish peish b'loy matzah? And if they did a diagnosis and they see that they're learning as much as they can, then what does it mean, yitla b'bittul Torah? Say it's bittul Torah. So one pshat in the Gemara is, it's a very simple and straightforward pshat, is that if you can't find the problem, yitla b'bittul Torah, assume it's because you didn't learn enough, and therefore ein bur yirei chet. The ignoramus can't be sin-fearing because you don't know, so you think you're not doing anything wrong, but that's because you don't know Hilchos Shabbos. You think that you're not doing anything wrong because that's because you don't know the laws of Lashon Hara. So yitla b'bittul Torah means assume that it's because you didn't learn enough and you don't know how to diagnose properly. That's one answer. There's another answer that fits in very good with our discussion today. And that is, a person that sees that he's suffering, he should look and see what's the Mida Keneged Mida to his suffering. In other words, let's say a person is getting a pain in their leg. So they should say, oh, am I running to do an Aveira? Right? Am I not walking to shul. Right? But then, pish peish b'loy matzah, if he can't find anything that would correspond to the leg, then yitla b'bittul Torah. Then you could say anything could be because of bittul Torah, because Talmud Torah can get kula. Anything could be because of bittul Torah. So once again, we see that we use midah keneged midah as a diagnostic tool. As an aside, when my first Rebbetzin was suffering terribly from pancreatic cancer, we went to the Skver Rebbe for a bracha. And the Heilige Skver Rebbe, an amazing person, who sits for hours and hours and hours into the wee hours of the morning, day after day, listening to people's sorrows. So he said to us that the Yisurin that she was going through, the terrible pains, he said, Yitla b'bittul Torah. Tell the Rabbeinu Shalom it's causing bittul Torah, and because of that it should go away. So that's another pshat in Yitla b'bittul Torah. Lo yaleinu. Now, the Heilige Baal Shem Tov also says that midah keneged midah is a way to know what's in store for us. You know, the Mishnah says, if you think of three things, then you won't come to sin. You should know what's above you, the ayin roya, the eye that sees, the eizin shamas, the ear that listens, and everything is recorded. The great camcorder in heaven. Know that everything is being recorded. It's a very big inhibition. However, the Baal Shem Tov says that you don't need to read the whole Mishnah. The first three words of the Mishnah also give us a tremendous lesson. Da ma l'mayla, if you want to know what's in store for you, mimcha, look at yourself. The way we behave, that's the way we're going to be treated. If we exercise patience, then we will be recipients of patience. If we exercise warmth, we'll be recipients of warmth. If we speak gently, people will speak gentle to us. Da malamayla, know what's in store for you above, mimecha, from the way you behave. And he says, I'll prove it to you. What's the acrostic of mimcha? Mem chaf is midah keneged midah. Mem is midah, the chaf of mimcha is keneged, and the second mem is midah. It's midah keneged midah. Through midah keneged midah, we know what's in store for us, and therefore midah keneged midah should be a very big inhibition in life. Because a person should say, you know, I don't want to treat my parents this way. Do I want my children one day to treat me this way? That's the midah keneged midah. Right? Or, you know something? I don't want to be so insensitive. I don't want to say hurtful words, because one day someone is going to hurl hurtful words at me. And this is the meaning of a pasuk which at first glance is difficult to understand. Hashem tzilcha al yad yaminecha. Hashem is a shadow over your right hand. Now, to call Hashem a shadow seems to be the highest insult. A shadow has no tangibility. It has nothing. How do we say that Hashem is a shadow? But there's one attribute of a shadow, and that is it mimics to perfection. And that's the way the Rabbeinu Shalom treats us in life. He mimics us to perfection. All the way at the beginning of mankind, when Hashem punished the snake for causing Adam and Chava to sin. So the snake tempted Chava, telling her the fruit was delicious, and therefore the snake was punished that it would never taste food anymore. Now the truth of the matter is, snakes don't eat flower pots. They don't eat earth. They eat steak. I saw that at the Staten Island Zoo. But it tastes to them like offer. They lost their taste, sense of taste. They lost their taste buds because they tempted man to sin. And because the snake caused death to mankind, right? El offer tashuv, that we have to return to the earth. Therefore, the snake lost its legs and was cursed to be Zeichalei offer to slither on the earth. And because the snake caused enmity between husband and wife, it says after the sin, Adam and Chava separated for 130 years. Therefore, the snake was punished that Eva Toshes, that is enmity between man and the snake for all time. So all the way in the beginning of time, the idea of Midah Keneged Midah has been introduced in the world. Now I want to tell you two stories, both that made a very big impression upon me about Midah Keneged Midah. One is a happy story because of a good action, and one is a very sad story because of poor behavior. We'll talk about the good story first. Before World War II, there was a very, very fine man by the name of Rav Yosef Brandfeld. And he got married, he built a family of 5 young children, and then suddenly his wife, Lo Yaleinu, his wife died. And here he was cast into tremendous hardship. Here is a young man with 5 Yisayimim without help. And in a neighboring town, there was a young girl just about ready to start dating who observed the hardship of Rav Yosef Brandfeld. And she was from a very, very wealthy family. And she had a heart brimming with kindness and giving, like Rivki Imenu. And she told her father that she has a strong feeling to help this man marry him, he's not that old, and be a mother for these 5 children. So she would right away start off, not start from the beginning, but she would immediately have 5 assets that she could help and save from being Yisayimim without a mother. As you can understand, they tried to dissuade her. She had everything going for her. She was had a rich nadan available. She could have had the best bacher in the yeshiva, but she was steadfast, and against all odds, she married him and was a wonderful wife and mother to the children. And they had 4 more of their own children. So now she had 9 children when, once again, tragedy struck. The Shaya started with all of its horrors, and due to the hardship and the pressure of the Shaya and the fear, her husband, who had a weak heart, Rav Yosef Brandfeld, succumbed and passed away. And now this relatively young woman finds herself in the middle of the horrors of the Holocaust with now 9 orphans. Here the Rabbeinu Shalom starts the attribute of measure for measure. Like she came to rescue for these children, Hashem rescued her and 9 children. They were able to all get visas, and they escaped from under the hands of the Nazis to Eretz Yisrael. When she arrived in Eretz Yisrael, the Chabina Rav had lost his wife, and as they were looking for a worthy Rebbetzin for the Chabina Rav, this woman's Mesiris Nefesh, what she did for Rav Yosef Brandfeld, and instead of choosing a young chassan, she went ahead and she took in a family of 5 Yisayimim. This was Matzah Chen in the eyes of the Chabina Gaon, one of the greatest Gedolim of the time, the Sar HaTorah as he was called at the time, and he decided to take her as his Rebbetzin. And now this wonderful woman would be rewarded for the next 17 years until the passing of the Chabina Rav. She was like the first lady of the aristocracy of Torah, and she hosted all the Gedolim of the time in her home, as we see how the Rabbeinu Shalom rewarded her Midah Keneged Midah for our Mesiris Nefesh. The Yitzhak Pnina HaTorah, on the other hand, brings a scary story. This also happened years ago. If you want to see this inside, it's in Parshas Mishpatim on page Shim Mem Vav. he tells about a young chassan who their wedding day came, and he did not arrive at the wedding. And everybody is there, all the guests is there, the kala is waiting for the bedekin, and the chassan doesn't show up. And finally, one of the friends and one of the family members goes to the house and finds him there, and he's pacing, and he says, I can't go on with it. I just can't do it. I said, why? He says, I just can't look at her with her glasses. This is before the days of, contact lenses and laser surgeries. I can't. So they said, don't be ridiculous. There's a kala waiting at the chuppah. There are hundreds of people there. He says, I cannot do it. He said, what are you talking about? You know what you're going to do to the kala? You know how you're going to fashem her? He says, I'm sorry, I can't marry her. I can't look at her like this. I just can't do it. And she was embarrassed and fashemed in front of all the hundreds of guests, and she was left, alone at the chuppah, and they had to cancel the wedding. Eventually, she would find a very good chassan, and she would get married. He also would find a girl and get married without glasses. 2 months after the wedding, the kala had to wear glasses. And then their first child was born with very poor eyes, and as a baby, the child needed to have glasses. And then he was in a car accident, and his eyes were hurt, and he had trouble with his eyes the rest of his life. So we have to know that a person needs to be schooled in the mishpatei of Hashem, of midah keneged midah, of measure for measure. And as a Rav, I can tell you that people who interfered with people's livelihoods, they would suffer in their livelihoods. And people who caused people to have all kinds of hurt, they would be affected, whether it's in their gesund, whether it's in their parnasa, whether it's hardship with their children. The Rabbeinu Shalom does things measure for measure, and we should think about this before we do something. Before we cause somebody pain, we should know that there's a great boomerang in heaven. What goes around comes around, and therefore we should use it as an inhibition not to do bad to others. Vayomer el Moshe. Now I'm going to rather tell you something. We're going to switch tracks, and I'm going to share with you something b'shem the Mekubalim, which is really, really very fascinating. Vayomer el Moshe, they reported to Yisro said to Moshe, Ani chaysencha Yisro ba'elecha. I, your father-in-law Yisro, have come to you. The Dorash Yehuda says in the name of the Mekubalim, and I believe also this is a Nachal Kedumim b'shem Achidah that I saw many years ago, that Moshe Rabbeinu was a Gilgal of Hevel. It's known that Moshe Rabbeinu was a Gilgal of Hevel and also a Gilgal of Noach. The Notrikin is Haman, because that's Hevel, Moshe, and Noach. But that's not an official Notrikin, because we don't want to remember the name of Haman. But anyway, Moshe Rabbeinu was a Gilgal of Hevel, and Yisro was a Gilgal of Cain. And that's why in this pasuk it says Ani chosencha Yisro. The first letter of Ani is Aleph, the first letter of chosencha is Ches, and the first letter of Yisro is Yud. That spells Ochi, because in a former reincarnation, Moshe and Yisro are brothers, Hevel and Cain. Now let's see how this fits in. I want to plug in a lot of things over here. First of all, that Moshe was a Gilgal of Hevel. Both Hevel was a Royet Tzayin, a shepherd. Moshe was also a Royet Tzayin. He was a shepherd. He was chosen because of the way he took care of the sheep. That's why Moshe is Miseh. He was chosen from the way he took care of a sheep. Now, if you look in the Sefer Chasidim, the name Hevel is a kind of a puzzling name. Who would name their child Hevel? Hevel is nothing, vanity. Can you see somebody saying, come here, nothing, come here, little vanity? It's a very strange name. That's why we don't have Hevels nowadays. Right? You don't have Hevels around. Now, the truth of the matter is, Shma Garm, a name foretells a person's destiny, and Hevel died in vain, murdered by his brother. But there's a Sefer Hasidim that says another reason why Hevel was called Hevel. He was called Hevel because when the fire came down from heaven to lick up his offering, he looked at it. Now, you're not supposed to look at the Shekhinah. It says, Lo Yirani ha'odam v'chai. You can't see me and live. So that's why he died, because he looked at the Havla of the Shekhinah. That's why he was called Hevel. And that's why Moshe Rabbeinu didn't look at the burning bush. Ki yorei mehabit. He was afraid to look. That's what it says about Moshe Rabbeinu. Ki yorei mehabit. He was misakin the sin of Hevel. Now, on the other hand, it fits in beautiful that both Hevel and Moshe had a fire come down from Shemayim. Hevel had a fire come down from Shemayim to lick up the carbon, and Moshe had a fire come down from Shemayim on the snare, on the bush. Now, we find that Yisro was a Gilgal of Cain, so Yisro was Misakin. What happened when Cain? So the first thing happened that Cain killed Hevel. So here, Yisro saves Moshe Rabbeinu. It's mamash a tikkun of the reincarnation. What happened? We know the Medrash Tanchuma tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu was sitting on Paro's lap, and he was playing with Paro, and all of a sudden Moshe Rabbeinu took off Paro's crown and put it on his head. And right away Bilam saw that, and Bilam immediately said, this must be the one that we were afraid of. This is the one that's going to overcome you, Paro. You have to kill him. So in the palace at that time was Yisro. He was one of Paro's advisors, and he said, nonsense. He just doesn't know what he's doing. The crown is shiny, and that's why he's playing with it and put it on his head. He says, I'll prove it to you. Yisro thought quick. He said, take a plate of shining coals and take a plate of dull gold and see which one the child is going to go after. If he's just a baby, he's going to go after the shining coals. If he knows what he's doing, then he'll go after the dull gold. Now, actually, Moshe Rabbeinu was going to go after the gold, but Gavriel came and pushed his hand, and he went after the coals. He burnt his hand, and because his hand hurt, he took it and he put it in his mouth, and he burnt his mouth, and that's how Moshe Rabbeinu became a stutterer. But Yisro here saved Moshe Rabbeinu's life. Moshe Rabbeinu was going to be killed. And that's how he was misakin, that when he killed Hevel as Cain. Furthermore, the Medrash says that Cain stole one of Hevel's twin sisters and married her instead of Hevel marrying her. And therefore, to be misakin that, Yisro gave his daughter, Tzipora, to Moshe Rabbeinu as a wife. So we see that everything here is being repaired. By the way, on that Medrash Tanchuma, it always bothered me that Aish Moshe Anav Ma'od Mikol Adam, that he would, as a young child, take the crown and put it on his head. So there's another version of the Medrash that it says that he took the crown and threw it on the ground, which is more consistent with the attitude of Moshe Rabbeinu. Also, by the way, the Shach HaTorah, one of the Guri Arizal, says, why did it have to happen that Moshe Rabbeinu had to burn his mouth? Why did he deserve to have that? So it says that the Moshe Rabbeinu, when he was taken out of the teva, he was crying, and they brought him the Egyptian wet nurses. And they all tried to nurse him, but it says, the mouth that would speak to the Shekhinah should be yonik from a tummy to mitzvahs, and therefore he wasn't yonik. But since the dadim were thrust in his mouth, he had some moisture, and therefore it was kashered by his mouth being burnt. And that's why he burnt his mouth. Of course, there's the famous Drashas Aran. The Drashas Aran says that Moshe Rabbeinu was made a stutterer, that people shouldn't say that they accepted the Torah from him because he was very charismatic. Therefore, he was a stutterer to understand that it wasn't because of his charisma, but it was rather because Divrei Emes Nikarim, the truth of the Torah. Also, one other thing, we know that Cain was guilty of being jealous of Yisro, and of Hevel, And Yisro corrected that by not being jealous of Moshe Rabbeinu, but instead according him great honor. And now we turn to the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments in itself is a fascinating study, and you could spend a lot of time on wondering why certain things were included, why certain things were omitted. It's beyond the scope of the shir to try to fathom why the Ten Commandments doesn't have the mitzvah of Torah, which is the purpose of the entire creation. And you can't say that the Ten Commandments is universal, because that's not true. Shabbos is forbidden to the Goyim. And you can't say it was given to both men and women, because Leisana v'reyacha eit shoker, not testifying falsely, is only given to men. It's also interesting that of the three relationships of man, and that's the relationship of a husband to a wife, a parent to a child, and a child to a parent, the only relationship that's discussed is that of a child to a parent. And that could be because there's always going to be that relationship. There might not be a relationship of a husband to a wife because they might not get married. And there might not be a relationship from a parent to a child because they might not have children. But there's always the relationship for a child to a parent. Now, although it's possible that a child could be bereaved of parents before they know them, as was the case with Esther Amalka, and as the case of Abaya, but there's still a mitzvah of kibbud av aim to send packages even to the next world. So since this is the only relationship that must be from a child to a parent, that's why kibbud av aim is the only one of the three relationships that's spoken about in the Ten Commandments. There are a lot of things like this to analyze. However, I've said many years that of all the midos that are discussed in the Torah and that we learn about in Musar, the entire gamut of midas, the only midah that's openly discussed in the Ten Commandments is jealousy. Lo yisachmoid, beis reyecha, eishes reyecha, shor reyecha, not coveting, not looking towards what is not yours with envy. Now, my dear Rebbetzin made me realize that that's really not such an accurate statement, because in the Ten Commandments there is embedded other midas. For example, lo yisirtzach, not to murder, right, is based on anger. People will kill in anger, and in hate. So those are two other midas. And lo yisinaf, not to commit adultery, is embedded in lust, right? In lust and in taiva. And we could say not testifying falsely is embedded in greed. And not taking Hashem's name in vain is the midah of truth, and staying away from falsehood. But it's still true that the only midah that's spoken about outright is jealousy, because jealousy is the root of all evil. We find that jealousy was the reason for Cain and Hevel. We find it was the problem between Esav and Yaakov, and we find it's the problem between Yosef and the brothers. We find that it was Kairach's jealousy of the position of Nasi, of Elitzaphan ben Uziel, that led to the terrible drama of the Adas Kairach and the Kurutz of Kairach being swallowed alive straight down to Gehenna. So therefore, it's something that is mentioned above all other character flaws. And it's something that we always have to be careful that we don't make our children jealous, and we don't favor one child above the other. We have to be very careful. Even when they become married, we have to be careful of this. It says, B'shvil shnei slam melas, because 2 slum worth of wool that Yaakov gave to Yosef over the brothers, we had to go down to Egypt and suffer in Egypt for 210 years. So it's something that we have to be very careful. In the Nusach Svard, we say the very important tefillah in Alakai Nitzar, Shaloi Sala Kinnis Adam Alai, that nobody should be jealous of me. That causes all kinds of terrible things, and it causes many losses from Ayin Hara. So the Chavetz Chaim, the Ibn Ezra, they all asked the question, how could you legislate feelings? How could you tell a person not to be jealous? It's a feeling. I mean, here's a person, goes to a bungalow colony, and he comes up after a hard week, and his wife right away puts him to work and yells at him about being late and harangues him the whole weekend about not having any time for the family. And he looks right next to him in the next door bungalow, and the wife of his friend comes out with a latte and greets him and says to him, you had such a hard week. Please, you're only here for 2 days. Take it easy. What could I do for you? So how could you tell that person not to be jealous? So the Chavetz Chaim says an interesting thing. He says it seems to be that there's a lot of rhetorical words in the pasuk. It says, "Lo yisachmoid beis re'echa," don't covet your friend's house. "V'lo yisachmoid eishes re'echa," your friend's wife. V'avdai, and his servant. V'amosai, his maidservant. V'shayrai, his ox. V'chamoirai, his donkey. V'kol asher re'echa, and everything that he has. So once it says kol asher re'echa, why does it have to itemize everything? It says, don't desire anything that's by your friend. Why does it have to say anything else? Just say, Lo yisachmoid kol asher re'echa. So the Chavetz Chaim says the pasuk is telling you that if you want your friend's wife, then you have to take everything that your friend has. And you have to take the kind of children he has. And you have to take the job that he has. And you have to take his brothers. And you have to take his brother-in-laws. And you have to take his health. Do you want to take everything? So the Kol Asher Re'echa says, by looking at everything, you'll know that you want to have what you have. Because that's the bracha that we say, Baruch atah Hashem she'asa li kol tzarki. Hashem, you made me, and you made what I need. Peiseches yedecha u'mazbiah l'chol chai ratzon. You gave me what I need. I can't desire just to have one thing of someone. If you want what the person has, you have to take everything. You have to take the whole pekala. And if you start looking at that, you'll see you'll want your pekala and no one else's pekala. Lo yia lecha Elohim acherim al panai. You shouldn't have any other God besides me. That's the command, not to do anything and not to show any respect for idolatry. Rav Shach, the great Rav Shach, Zechatzad Kodesh Avrocha Schusi Yogan Aleinu, commented that Rashi's Rebbe, the famous Rabbeinu Gershom Or HaGoyla, the light of the diaspora, was greater than his Talmud Rashi. Yet it was Rashi that merited to be the Rabban Shel Yisrael, the Rebbe of all of Klal Yisrael, and Rashi was Zoicha that his lips move in the kever every moment. Because at every moment somebody is learning his Rashi on Gemara, his Rashi on Chumash, his Rashi on Navi, his Rashi on Mishnayos, his Rashi everywhere, his Sefer HaPardes, somebody is always learning. And Rav Shach says, why? Rabbeinu Gershom, his Rebbe, was even greater. So Rav Shach says, first of all, it was the schus of Rashi's mama, who was the sister, Tzedekes, the sister of Rabbeinu Shimon HaGadol Mimagensa, and because of his saintly father, as it brings down in the Seder HaDoros, that his father had a very, very rare and precious gem that made him a fabulously wealthy person. One time, the church saw that his gem was the perfect match for the idol, and they came to him and they offered money for it. And he couldn't wiggle out of it. So he traveled on a boat, and in the middle of the sea, he threw the gem into the water, saying that it was lost, and gave up an entire fortune. At that time, there was a baskel that went out and said, you gave up your entire fortune, you'll be zeicha to have a son that will be a shining gem and will illuminate the entire world with his Torah. You have to know that the things that we do with Mesiras Nefesh, sometimes they don't just benefit us, but they benefit our descendants and make our descendants very special. Today, we don't have idolatry, but we have another El Acher. They used to turn to the idolatry. The idolatry made their life easier. It gave them information. It let them know about the future. Today, we have another El Acher. People have a screen in their home, and they get all kinds of information, and they watch it, and it gives them relaxation, and it gives them pleasure. And when a person is careful not to turn to that, he doesn't have Elihim Acherim, then it doesn't only benefit him and her, but it benefits their descendants as well. Yisro saw that Moshe Rabbeinu sat to judge the people, and the people were with Moshe Rabbeinu from the morning until the evening. And there's an obvious question. You know, nowadays, the Rabbanim are very busy. You know, there's all kinds of questions. He opened a pizza shop too near my pizza shop. What are you talking about? You're going after that client. I already went after that client. How could you yet show the home to somebody when I already am in middle of contract with that person with the home? There's all kinds of shilas. What do you mean? He paid me, I paid him already for the kitchen, and he didn't do this, and he didn't do that. Well, he made me a roof, and it leaks. There are all kinds of problems, but in the Midbar, there were no businesses. There was no parkamatya, there were no stores, there was no asagas gevul. What were all the shilas that came to Moshe that was wearing him from the morning till the evening? It's interesting that I remember when I was reading the authentic biography, the official biography of the Chavetz Chaim, in a footnote, it says that the Chavetz Chaim said that Moshe Rabbeinu was busy with shidduchin problems. Because especially in those days, when there was a din of loisosav nachala, that you weren't supposed to marry out of the shevet, there were different people that wanted the same girl. Remember, it wasn't a question of money. Everybody had money. But they wanted the yichas. Everybody wanted the same girl. Everybody wanted the same boy. So Moshe Rabbeinu had to deal with shidduchin problems, a shidduch crisis. That's the way the Chavetz Chaim learns. It's interesting that the Paneach Raza, one of the Rishonim, asked this question. And the Paneach Raza says that there was a lot of sichsuchim, a lot of arguments about the bizas hayam, about the booty that they took from the Red Sea. It says, Gadol bizas hayam and bizas Mitzrayim. The booty of the Red Sea was greater than the booty of Egypt. Now, the people that got out right away, the Egyptians weren't yet cast to the water, from the water, and they didn't get much of the booty. But afterwards, the people that came out later, when the Egyptians were thrown out with all of their silver and gold and their equipment with them, they took a lot of the booty. So it was an unequal taking of booty. So there were many people that came to Moshe and said, we believe that it should be divided equally. So this was something that Moshe Rabbeinu had to adjudicate, which is, you know, it's a Musa Haskell. There were many arguments over the money. The truth of the matter is, people in the Midbar, they were supposed to be learning, and people spent a lot of time over the money, which was a pure waste of time, because that money had no use to them. First of all, they all had tremendous wealth from Egypt. They came out with 70 donkeys or 90 donkeys of wealth, and they would never get to use it because there were no stores for 40 years in the Midbar. There were no, you couldn't go to a furniture store. You didn't have a house to furnish. And there were no stores. There were no fancy eateries. There were no restaurants. There was nothing to do with the money. And yet they wasted so much time. It's a big Musa Haskel. We don't take any money with us. It's not worth. People waste so much time arguing about money. The only thing, by the way, that they could do with their money worthwhile during their lifetime was to give it to the Mishkan. And that's also very instructive, that the real acquisition of money, and that's why it says, it doesn't say titnu es trumasi, tikru es trumasi. The only way they were really able to keep the money is when they gave it to the Mishkan. That's the money that we take it with us. The kittel has no pockets. We don't take anything with us except that which we give away, except that which we help others with. Now, it's interesting that the Chizkuni has another pshat. The Chizkuni says that it was the Erev Rav, the 1,000,000 Egyptians that were Megayer. They said, oh, you took loans. You took loans from our relatives. We want it back. Those were our relatives. It's interesting that the Chizkuni should learn that way, because the Chorah of Bnei Yisrael should say, if you want that back, then also pay us for the servitude that we did for you for 117 years that we weren't paid for. I would have said, to answer this question, my own answer, and that is that Moshe Rabbeinu was busy with Shalom Bayis. However, I would imagine that the Chofetz Chaim doesn't give this answer because that's what Aaron was busy with. Remember, it says that when Aaron passed away, 80,000 children by the name of Aaron followed his coffin. And it says because those were 80,000 marriages that he saved, and when they had children, they named them Aaron in his merit. And that's besides the families that didn't have children and the families that only had girls. They didn't call them Ariellas in those days. Now, it's interesting over here, the Ramban says, it's a very, very informative Ramban. The Ramban says that there are 3 functions of a Rav. Number 1, it's to pray for those that are sick. So this could be a reason why they went to Moshe Rabbeinu, to pray for those that were sick, to resolve machloikis, quarrels, and the third is to teach Torah. I wanted to make one further observation before I move on from this subject, and that is it's interesting that at the time of Rabbi Akiva, he was the Rebbe of all 24,000 Talmidim. And we know that they came to a sorry end, mipnei sheloi nogu kavod zeh lezeh. They didn't give proper respect to one another. And one could conjecture that they didn't because they didn't feel that they were more special one from the other. They all learned the same Torah from the same Rebbe. Now that same dynamic was in the Midbar because they all learned Torah from the same Rebbe, from Moshe Rabbeinu. Just an interesting observation. Vayetze Moshe likras choisnoi. Moshe Rabbeinu went out to greet his father-in-law. So the Rav Mibar Tanura, who was of course famous for his Pirush on Mishnayos, the Rav Mibar Tanura also wrote a Pirush on Chumash. It's a Pirush primarily on Rashi, but the Rav over here makes an interesting observation. He says a lot of times when A does a favor for B, and then B becomes famous, he forgets what A did for him because he's famous. So, for example, that's exactly what happened to the Sar Mashkim. Yosef did a favor for him when he was in the dungeon, and he gave him a favorable interpretation of his dream. But then, when the Sar Mashkim was elevated and was brought back into the palace, he forgot all about Yosef. The Rav says that Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't that way. And although he would become a leader of Klal Yisrael, he didn't forget when Yisro helped him, when he was a fugitive in Midian and gave him his daughter and allowed him to take the matter of Moshe, and now he would show him tremendous honor in the Midbar. That's because of his Akaras HaToiv to his Shver. So on the subject of Akaras HaToiv, I saw in the Barchi Nafshi an amazing story. Fasten your seatbelts. An amazing story. There was a Rosh Hashiva in Yerushalayim who, when he was younger, was on the Bezdin of Rav Chaim Oizer Gudzinski. And Rav Zilverstein noticed that this Rosh Yeshiva, before going to the yeshiva, this Rosh Yeshiva was a very busy Rosh Yeshiva. This Rosh Yeshiva, before going to yeshiva every day, he would go out with a keli, and he would water a certain plant. And he would do this with great devotion every morning except for Shabbos. And Rav Silverstein wondered, he's such a busy Rosh Yeshiva. Every morning before he goes to Shabbos, before he goes to yeshiva, he's watering the plant. Now, when I heard this, I figured for sure it must be an angle of Shalom Bayis, that his wife loves the plant or something. But I was wrong. He asked him about it. So he said that when he was during the Nazis, Yamach Shemam V'Zichron, the Nazis stormed his home, and they started rounding up his family to take them to the gas chamber where they would all perish. Neshama should have an aliyah. Hashem Yinkum Damam. He was a little child, and with all the noise and the commotion and the screaming, he snuck out, and he had the presence of mind to hide behind a very big shrub in the front of his house. Now, they did a count, and he was missing, and the Nazis searched and searched for him, but because the shrub was so big, he was able to remain undetected, and when they left, he quickly ran into the forest where he would join the partisans and be saved from the war, and eventually he would emigrate to Eretz Yisrael. Incidentally, he told another fascinating story about the almost Ruach HaKodesh of the Gadol Adar. He said when he learned by Reb Chaim Oizer one day took him for a walk in the fields, and he started showing him which plants are edible and which plants are not. And at the time, he was so puzzled why the Rebbe was showing him this, but later on, as a partisan, he was able to survive, having learned which plants were edible and which plants were poisonous, and he helped the partisans and grew to great favor because of this knowledge. Anyway, when he survived the war, he went back to his old house, which was still standing, and he cut off a branch from the shrub that saved his life, and he brought it with him to Eretz Yisrael and planted it. And every day he would water it for Hakaras HaTov to the shrub that saved his life. That's the Yiddish concept of Hakaras HaTov. Incidentally, late at the end of this week's parasha, it says "V'lo yisale b'malois al mizbechi," that the mizbeach did not have steps but a ramp, because if it would have steps, you would have to take wide strides, and it would uncover, so to speak, the nakedness in front of the stones. And since the stones helped every day in the avodah of the karbanos, it wouldn't be right to act in such a disgraceful way to spread the legs to the stones. So we see how we have even Hakaras HaTov to a doiming. A person should never kick their car and say, what are you doing to me? Right? A person, we have Hakaras HaTov to all that does good to us, even to a shrub. Now I see it's very late. Before, I don't want to forget, first of all, I want to mention that last week, during the time of the live stream, there was a crash for TorahAnytime.com, which lasted about a half an hour and cut out half of the shir. I'm sorry about that, but there's nothing you can do about it. We rely on technology. If that should happen, God forbid, then you should know that afterwards the shir, within an hour or two, is put onto the Chumash section of TorahAnytime.com, so you could watch it later. Of course, if you want to get the shir earlier in the week, I record it about Monday and Tuesday, and send it out to my digital subscribers, So for $26 a month, you could get it right away in your email, or to some people, if they don't have email, a CD earlier in the month. In order to do that, call me or text me at 718-916-3100 and rmmwsi at AOL.com. With the help of Hashem, the last few weeks, we've had a lot of sponsors, but every week is a different. I don't know anything from week to week. Next week, I have one sponsor. I do have one sponsor for next week, but I'd like to try to get more than one sponsor. If you would like to sponsor, 718-916-3100, rmmwsi at AOL.com. That's Rabbi Moshe Meir Weiss, Staten Island, at AOL.com. I need to know in the beginning of the week, so please let me know. Motzei Shabbos, Sunday, if you would like to sponsor. It's, of course, a tremendous help. If you enjoy this year, please try to do it once in a while. In the Ten Commandments, we learn about Shabbos Kodesh. Shabbos Kodesh, which is Shakul Keneged Kol HaTorah Kula, which is equal to the whole Torah. Zachar es Yom HaShabbos L'Katshai, remember the Shabbos day to sanctify it. Sheishis Yomim Tavoid, 6 days you should work. V'asisa Kol Malachtecha. There's a very exciting Al-Shech HaKodesh. The Al-Shech HaKodesh says, Kasher Tizkar L'Kadesh Shabbos. When you remember to make Shabbos holy, Tizke B'Schar Shmira Shabbos, we will merit through the keeping of the Shabbos, Sheyatzlichacha Hashem, that Hashem will allow you to prosper, V'yazrecha B'iskecha, and help you in all your dealings, B'Sheishis Yimei HaMaisa, Ki HaShabbos Mikor HaBracha. For Shabbos is the source of all blessing. So let's stop and think for a second. Practically, what does it mean when the Al-Shech says, Kasher Tizkar L'Kadesh Es HaShabbos? When you remember to make Shabbos holy. What does that mean, making Shabbos holy? What does that mean? So when a man says under the chuppah to his wife, Hariat Mikudeshesli, that means that you are separated to me. You are special to me. I will give to you what I give to no other. The way I talk to you, the tenderness I talk to you, the time I spend with you. So when we say Kasher Tizkar L'Kadesh Es HaShabbos, it means when we remember to make Shabbos special. And we have all kinds of ways to make Shabbos special. First of all, we make Shabbos special with the way we speak. V'daber davar shelo yediburcha shel Shabbos kediburcha shel chol. We speak differently on Shabbos. It says that an Abba Oretz in the olden day, you would be allowed to ask him if he took off Trumas and Maises, although normally we don't trust them and we take the Mai. But on Shabbos, an Abba Oretz, the olden day Abba Oretz would not lie on Shabbos. On Shabbos, we don't say things that we're not allowed to do on Shabbos. It's a different type of talk. It says a person should be able to be recognized by the way they talk on Shabbos. On Shabbos, we daven differently. Shabbos, it's good to give thanks to Hashem because, first of all, we're not focused on gimme, gimme, gimme. We're focused on praising Hashem, right? That's why on Shabbos we don't have the middle brachas. Shabbos is a good day to thank Hashem, to say nishmas, to say moedim. Also, Shabbos we could daven without being a rush. We don't have to catch the express bus. We don't have to get on the highway before things get busy. We don't have to hurry home to answer an email or to speak to a client or a customer. Right? So therefore, that's how we make Shabbos different. V'chibadatai. We honor Shabbos with ksus nekiah, with clean and special clothing. We honor Shabbos with hachana. We honor Shabbos with special food, with food that we only eat on Shabbos. We honor Shabbos. These are all ways l'kadesh es Shabbos. You know, the Gemara says, B'shefta Shabbos, on one of the most famous bletta in Shas, on Daf Kuf Yud Tes. The Gemara says that why are there wealthy people in Eretz Yisrael? Because we give Trumas HaMaisus. It says Aser to Aser, Aser b'shvil shetis Asher. Then the Gemara says in Bavel, where they don't have Trumas HaMaisus, why are they wealthy people? Because they honor Talmidei Chachamim. And then the Gemara says in other lands where they don't have Talmidei Chachamim, why are people wealthy? Because they honor Shabbos. So when we honor Shabbos by making the home beautiful on Shabbos, we honor Shabbos by not screaming on Shabbos. People, there's a story about a taxi driver that he was taking a Koilo younger man for a ride. And the Koilo younger man asks him, how many hours a day do you work? So he says, between 12 and 16 hours a day. So the Koilo man was taken aback. And he said to him, wow, you must have a penthouse. You must be very wealthy. He said, what wealthy? I barely pay my rent. I barely make ends meet. So the Koil younger man looks at him and he says, I work nowhere near 12 to 16 hours a day. And I have 9 children. And I, Baruch Hashem, am able to pay my rent and feed my 9 children. So the taxi driver looked at him ruefully, and he says, well, I have no explanation. Now the taxi driver was not dati. So the Koil younger man said, I'll tell you what it is. You know, some houses, they have plenty of water, and other houses, their water is not good and the pressure is not good. Why? Because their pipes are rusty, and their pipes are old, and they're not in good working order. He says, we all get parnasa from Hashem, but the pipe that it comes through is Shabbos. If you have good pipes, if your Shabbos is clean, if you honor the Shabbos, then the tziner from Shemayim, the pipeline from Shabbos, from Shemayim, comes with all the blessing that was promised to you on Rosh Hashanah. But if you're not keeping Shabbos correctly, then your pipes are rusty, and you're not getting the Shefa Bracha from the Eibishter. This is the recipe that the Al Shech HaKadosh tells us, that if we Zachar es Yom HaShabbos L'Katshei, we honor the Shabbos, we spend money buying beautiful things for Shabbos, we take a good shower and clean ourselves for Shabbos, we sing Zmiris on Shabbos, and we give honor after Shabbos with a Malava Malka, and we come home from shul, and the Malachim see that the table is set, the beds are made, and everybody is dressed in honor of Shabbos, and we respect the Shabbos by giving it the proper kedusha, by not mimsoi chefzecha, for not pursuing other pursuits on Shabbos, not looking at the stock market, not reading things that are inappropriate for Shabbos, but we give the Shabbos the correct kedusha, then that has an effect that, if so, Vasisa Kamalachtecha, Hashem will take care of all of our needs. As always, I want to thank you all for joining me. Thank TorahAnytime.com, and ask you to please take a chance at being a sponsor. 718-916-3100, rmmwsi at AOL.com. If you want to subscribe to get the share in the beginning of the week, 718-916-3100. Thank you for joining me, and have a wonderful Shabbos.